This is the simplest track I've ever broken down on my channel, and I'm hoping it'll be useful for some of you if you're finding that your lo-fi beats are a little bit overcrowded or feel a bit chaotic, to hopefully see how you can take really simple elements and still make an engaging and interesting track. So without further ado, let's give it a listen so you guys know exactly what you're getting into. So this is the entire project file for a track I have coming out tomorrow called I Thought I Knew. Big shout out to Soft Tones Music for supporting this one. Really excited for it to come out. It's definitely one of the simpler tracks I've made in a long time, but I really love how it came out. And I think it's a really good demonstration of how every single element in all of your tracks really, but especially the simple ones, should be playing a very specific and very important role. So hopefully you'll see as I go through each of these elements that if I were to remove any one of them, the track really wouldn't feel the same anymore, which is something you should be aiming for in all of your tracks, no matter how high or low energy they might be. Everything should be playing a specific, well-defined role. So let's dive into exactly what roles each of these elements are playing. So the backbone of this track is this sort of like Rhodes-like synth thing that I found on some subreddit some time ago. I can't tell you too much about the preset. I just downloaded a free pack. I think this entire track is only free packs from Reddit. Couldn't tell you what the pack is, but I highly recommend perusing Reddit for some good free Serum presets if you don't necessarily have the budget for one. Like I said, it's this kind of like synthy Rhodes texture with a good built-in delay kind of baked right in. It's got a tiny bit of mid-focus distortion, some delay, like I said, compression, reverb, and a filter on a nice long tail ADSR. So we get something that kind of rings out with a nice half note delay echo. And that is just arpeggiating through a dead simple chord progression. We start with an F major, inverted, so that the C is essentially the drone, and then that moves into an A minor, then a C major, and then, I don't know, I guess this would be like a C sharp 4, I don't know, some cool little suspension thing. But this happens the entire track, and it's really the foundation of it. So that's how the track opens up. So as that is sort of working through the first 4 bars, I'm introducing this drone sound, which once again is doing the same thing the entire song. And in this case, it's octave Cs being played on another preset I found on Reddit. This is just a pad from a synthwave pack I found. Just got this nice kind of spacey, long tail, slow attack, very reverbed out. With a lot of three-dimensional action going on. It's taking up a lot of the stereo space, which I feel like helps sort of solidify the foundation and fill in some of the dead spaces of this pad, which I also go on to introduce throughout the latter half of the introduction. And all this pad is doing is, once again, on the third Serum preset that I also got from Reddit, I've got a nice slow attack pad that is following the chord progression, just a slightly simplified version. I didn't want that dissonance ringing through the pad sound, so I got rid of the F sharp basically, but everything else is just following the chord progression exactly. Instead of arpeggiating, it's attacking all at the same time. And so rather than just having all of them come in full throttle right away, I'm introducing each of them sort of staggered so that the intro is like progressing a little bit as we move through it. So you can hear those swell up here. Sorry about those clicks and pops. I've got a amp simulator on here that I didn't freeze, and my CPU is not pumped about the screen recorder going at the same time. I hope they're not too disruptive as you guys watch the video. But anywho, moving into the actual drop, I introduce another layer of that same synth, the same Rhodes part, as a melody layer. It's a very, very simple melody. Essentially all I'm doing is hitting the same note from the chords on that second, or the second beat, the end of the one, and then I've got a nice transition note through the first measure and then through the fourth measure that basically just sort of act as lead-ins to the next chord. So I end up with this sort of like offbeat accent coming from this melodic layer that is essentially just an extension of the chord progression. So you could think of it as like a second hand playing on this Rhodes synth. So then on top of that melodic layer, I of course bring the drums into the first drop. And there are only 3 drum layers, no perks, no Foleys, no anything fancy. We've got a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat, which I believe was an open hi-hat sample. Oh, so we've got a closed and an open hi-hat, sorry, so 4 drum layers. Doing a really simple, very minimalistic pattern. I think these are both from, Dark Winters, one of Dark Winters packs. So yeah, really not too busy. They're not hitting like every single 8th note, and they're kind of taking turns, not hitting together too frequently, if at all actually. Pretty standard kick snare pattern, kick on the 1 and the 3, a little bit of fun little pickups going back into the 1 in a few spots here, just to keep a little bit of groove going, and then the snare on the 1 and the 3. My old friend key bass, just dead simple. We've got an F and then 3 Cs, all whole notes. Nothing too fancy going on there. So let's give a listen to all the melodic layers before we get into the guitar here. So now as we dive into the guitar part, this is going to look a little bit different than what I usually preach pretty heavily about on this channel with call and response. And so my thinking here was essentially because this really simple chord arpeggio is happening the entire time, like literally from start to finish. It's a very consistent element. I figured that it wasn't so important to be necessarily playing back and forth with it, but rather trying to evolve it with the layers I was adding. So in this case, you're going to hear a lot of the guitar and that chord arpeggio moving at the same time. There's a little bit of sort of back and forth play just to keep the guitar line interesting. You don't want, everything hitting exactly on the 1 every time. But you'll notice as the guitar part progresses, rather than necessarily waiting for gaps in the chord melody, it's working with the chord melody to sort of evolve the sound, rather than letting that be the chief thing that your ears latch onto for the entire song. In this first section, the first drop, we've got sort of like a nice sort of high-end, lightly moving but very spacious guitar. It's essentially 1 phrase per measure and then a good long gap for a final phrase all through the first 4 bars. You can hear that here. And sorry about the clicks and pops. Big long space. So very, very simple, super minimalistic melody, but it's already completely transformed what that chord progression was doing melodically, right? It's not just a second layer of the arpeggio, it's completely different motion, completely different feeling, and that chord progression immediately kind of sinks into the background as something that your ears are already used to. So it's holding down the foundation without like taking too much attention away, or at least that was what I was hoping for. But you'll see in this case, normally I like to sort of draw out my first drop, give it a little bit more evolution along the same motif, but sort of along the same line of what I was just saying. I've got this really repetitive element going on that's the foundation of the track, so I wanted to make sure the elements I'm adding on top to evolve it don't get stale. So immediately, one time through that motif, one time through the melody, I'm already switching up the guitar part right into this bridge section. So we've got 4 bars of intro, 4 bars of drop, and then 4 bars of bridge. So let's go through the guitar part first because that's where we're at, and then I'll talk about what else I did with some automation to keep that bridge section interesting. Coming out of the first drop. So again, completely new type of motion, a completely different register of the guitar. It's palm muted, so it's got a really different feeling, which makes this guitar feel like a completely different section from the first, even though it's the exact same effects chain, everything's processed the same. It's just played differently, different style, different timing, different energy. And that complements really nicely with all of these automations that I did to change the exact same elements to give them a bit of a different feeling. And so sort of diving into that without going through every single specific detail. On the chord progression, I basically just copied the exact chords, same preset, routed it to a new mixer track, and added on this RC20, which I had deactivated at that moment because it was making noise. So that's not fully what it sounds like. But anywho, I threw in this RC20, which adds a bunch of sort of wobble and some vinyl noise, a bunch of extra reverb and a little bit of extra distortion, and really narrows out the EQ here, so you can see that down here in the bottom. And I brought the gain down a good bit, just sort of make up for some of the weird phasing that comes in through that. Similarly, the melody, I did the same thing, duplicated the track, sent it to a new mixer, and then routed that melody to the bridge effects, which was what was automating up here. So now the chords and the melody basically have a completely new timbre coming from section 1 to section 2. You can hear that here. So just really lo-fi-ify it, basically. And in a similar vein, I did the same thing with the drum processing, right? So I've got 3 EQ automations that are essentially doing the same thing, just to give it a little bit more of a telephone filter effect. So the hi-hat, I've got an EQ coming up that cuts out a bit of the highs. For the kick, I've got an EQ coming up that actually cuts out a bit of the lows, making the kick feel a little bit more clicky and a little bit less thump. And then for the snare, same thing. I've cut out a good bit of the highs to just sort of soften it up a bit. This is an interesting thing that I don't see done a ton. I'm obviously not the first to do it ever, but could be an interesting tool, is that for the bass, this is a really sub-dominant bass sound. I've talked about it a good bit on the channel. It's the key bass. And what I did through this bridge section is I actually added this nice high-pass EQ with a big giant mid boost so that even the bass loses a ton of the sub-foundation and then is really just a mid-present texture there. So all of the lows are cut out, a bunch of the highs are cut out, and we've got this more like telephone filtered thing going on all of our percussive elements and our main melody, so that this much more gentle, plucky, palm muted guitar can sort of shine through. So altogether, this transition sounds like this. So, as I said, this is the simplest track that I've ever broken down on my channel, and the way that I kept it so simple while still being engaging is by reusing the motifs every 4 bars in the guitar. So everything continues to repeat, the automations go away, it opens back up into a nice full arrangement with one more white noise sweep effect. And then rather than just simply being the exact same motif from before, I add this second guitar layer that's this nice higher harmony layer, which I think helps evolve it even further, keeps it fresh from the first section, but is also familiar enough to feel very much at home in the rest of the track. So what I had muted there in the final section of this like larger drop was that the second time through the chord progression, the double drop basically compared to the first one. I bring that the second guitar motif back in with the palm mute going on. On top of that, in the dead spaces between the palm mute, I've got this additional sort of call and response guitar going on. So now we've got the first new guitar layer after 3 repeats of something that's been familiar. So it goes single guitar, single brand new, completely different feeling guitar, and then repeat of the initial guitar with a new layer that sort of transforms the energy. And then we bring back another familiar guitar layer with a call and response. So now the energy and the motion is happening in slightly different places. All that sort of comes together where each element is doing something important on its own, and without any one of them, it's gonna feel a little bit empty, it's gonna feel a lot different, and definitely gonna feel a lot less engaging. So it could have been super easy to add like more ear candy, different call and response elements, a bell texture, a more complicated guitar part. But I feel like that would eventually start getting away from this like very mellow, very peaceful, very serene feeling I was going for. So yeah, I do hope this was helpful. I think it's gonna be a really quick one. If you guys have any questions or you'd like me to expand on anything in another video, definitely let me know down in the comments. If you've been around the channel a few times and you're not subscribed yet, definitely think about hitting the subscribe button. We are on the road to 2,000 subscribers. Final thing, I guess, is join the Discord. Hope to see you guys there. We do a lot of fun challenges, and it's just a fun place to hang out. So anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Peace.